Friends, it's my great pleasure and privilege to welcome you to St. Bartholomew's for our service of Holy Communion today. It's great to gather together, whether you're only able to join us online or whether you're here in the building. On the way in, you picked up, I hope, our hymn book and also a bumper pack of papers. We are privileged this morning to be welcoming William Lawrence into the church family and into God's universal church. Yes, you should have a little party for that, Alan. As we baptize him. So there's a small insert featuring William's story in his own words that you're very welcome. I would encourage you to read it, and also the liturgy we'll be using as we baptize him a little bit later on in the service. As ever, if you're new or just visiting, there is a welcome sheet that tells you a little bit of information about our church and how you sort of find your way to toilets, that kind of thing. There's a map on the back, so I hope that's useful for you to orient you to how we do things in this church community. We are a church community, and it's a privilege to welcome people and to celebrate those joyful moments. Our church is also a place where we carry one another and support each other in the sad and difficult moments of our lives. And this week, we heard the news that 2 members of our church family have died. John Jackson, who with his wife Elizabeth was a long time member of our church. Elizabeth still is. They haven't been able to attend church for some years now. He died peacefully at home on Sunday afternoon. And on Monday morning, Nigel Richards, who for many years has been over in a care home in Solihull, but was a member of our church before then, he sadly died on Monday as well. So we grieve with the family and friends of Nigel and John. And it is fitting, though, that we're in the season of Easter still. In a moment, we'll say our greeting together, where we remember that Christ is risen. And so though we do grieve, we don't grieve without hope. And in fact, for John and for Nigel, they are safer and more at rest and peace and in joy than any of us will be until glory. And so we can give thanks that the good news of Jesus Christ is good news, particularly on a day like today, when we have sad news to share together. So with that,
the reading is from Ecclesiastes, chapter 1, verses 12 to 2:11. You'll find it on page 670 in the Pew Bibles, which you'll find at the end of the pews if you want to follow along now or during the sermon. The title is Wisdom is Meaningless. I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavenly burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, look, I have increased in wisdom more than anyone who has ruled over Jerusalem before me. I've experienced much of wisdom and knowledge. Then I applied myself to the understanding of wisdom and also of madness and folly. But I learned that this too is all chasing after the wind. For with much wisdom comes much sorrow. The more knowledge, the more grief. Pleasures are meaningless. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find what is good. But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness. And what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly, my mind still guiding me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives. I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself and planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I brought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born in my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of a man's heart. but I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. In all this my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much, Martin. The grown will have our second reading from Scripture. The reading is Ecclesiastes chapter 2, beginning at verse 12. Page 671 in the church Bibles. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. Then what then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless, for the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. And who knows whether that person will be wise or foolish? Yet they will have control over all the fruit of my toil, into which I have poured my effort and skill under the sun. This too is meaningless. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. This too is meaningless. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment? To the person who pleases him, God gives wisdom, knowledge, and happiness. But to the sinner, he gives the task of gathering and storing up wealth to hand it over to the one who pleases God. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I wonder if you found it a bit tricky to say that that is the word of the Lord. It's a very strange book, Ecclesiastes. We've just started reading through it and learning from it together in our 10:30 service here and also in our home groups. And someone said to me just yesterday, it's one of those books that perhaps if you were being honest, you wouldn't have expected to find in the Bible. But what if it's actually got a message of joy? It doesn't sound like it from these first two chapters. But what if it's got a secret, if you like, to a life of joy, which is an open secret that has been widely reviewed on documented research, that's been published and republished over and over again? I do think that that is what the book of Ecclesiastes claims to offer us. An open secret to where you find joy in life. Now, you can't fail to notice that joy feels like one of those things in shorter and shorter supply. I don't want to be overly negative, but by almost every measure, people are finding, particularly in the West, that every successive generation is a bit less happy than the one before. Take any statistic you like, and I think it sort of makes that claim. Here's just one. US college students, their rates of depression and anxiety doubled from 2010 to 2018. And that was before COVID-19 and before all the other things of the last 5 or so years that have felt like the world's been churned up more than ever. All those events which feel like they're sort of, ramping up in their speed and the horrors that they might bring. It's striking that statistically, you are 10 times less likely to die from a natural disaster if you're alive today than if you were alive 100 years ago. 10 times less likely in the world. But who feels like that? Most people, I think, would suspect that natural disasters are on the rise, that the sort of, the catastrophes that are facing our world are increasing. And it's not making us very happy. And yet Ecclesiastes holds out to us the real prospect of being able to live a life of joy. And the strange heart of this book's message, if you like, is that life of joy comes when you recognize that your life is like smoke or vapor, that's brief and elusive, and that you don't gain anything from all the toil of your life. Those two truths are fundamental truths about the universe, and they have the power to make you very happy. Now, it doesn't feel like it, does it? If we were to sort of say, give me the ingredients of a happy life, well, we might not be so crass as to think, just loads of money. But there will be certain things, a sort of fulfilling job that you wake up and you feel really proud to have done. A family who love you and care for you. A stable home. A sense of, sort of over your life, working towards things that have sort of meaning and value and purpose. Here's what's so striking from the first 2 chapters of Ecclesiastes. The writer basically says, I've done all that. Let me show you what it's like. So the first thing he does is he does a kind of research program into where a meaningful, purposeful, joyful life can be found. And the point of it is that every avenue he goes down, he finds frustration. He starts with basically everything that goes on. It's all slightly hyperbolic. We aren't sure if this guy was an actual person. Some people kind of connect him with King Solomon in the Bible. But he might not be. He might be a kind of a literary creation, almost to get you thinking, a sort of thought experiment. If you could take the most powerful, successful, wise, insightful person, if you could take him or her and put them into all these situations, would they find the purpose of life there? He starts off looking at basically everything that's been done. Verse 12, I, the teacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. He goes on particularly to look at pleasure at the start of chapter 2. Come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good. And he lists all the pleasures he can find that were kind of common in his day. And then he looks particularly at the issue, zooming in on wisdom. I thought, if I think carefully, okay, I'm not going to just pursue hedonism, unending pleasure, but living a wise life. Chapter 2, verse 12 onwards. Living sort of smartly, I suppose. He does this research program across all the different avenues of life. And his result is striking. Now, we talked about it a bit last week, but this word that our translations of the Bible translate as meaningless. In the old King James Version, vanity. And we thought a bit about how neither of those words maybe quite captures what the writer is getting at. It's not meaningless, it's not vanity, but the idea of smoke or vapor has been the most helpful thing for me. We lit a candle last week, didn't we? We looked at the smoke rising. The smoke is real, but it doesn't last. And you can't bottle it up and keep it for yourself. The vapor disappears. There's another picture that he uses a few times in the book. Right at the end of the reading, you see one example. This too is meaningless, he says, a chasing after the wind. Now, those two phrases, meaningless or chasing after the wind, are supposed to mutually interpret each other, which gives you a clue that it's not about no meaning whatsoever. But imagine on a windy day going to stand on a cliff and trying to gather up the wind blowing into your arms. It would be madness. It would be impossible. You're doing a completely futile activity, trying to kind of gather the wind and keep hold of it. It's not to say the wind isn't real. The wind is there, it's influencing you, but you can't grab it. That's, by the very nature of it. And basically, this guy's research program, he wants to point you to the direction that in all these places where you look for sort of solid joy, purpose, meaning, hope, satisfaction, They might be real, but they're all elusive. They're like smoke disappearing, like wind that you can't capture. And here's the issue. It's not that he failed to get all the good things. Again, if it's a sort of literary persona, you imagine this guy has succeeded in everything. But throughout, he comes back to a series of really pointed conclusions. He gives you the first hint of it in verse 15. Why is everything sort of this elusive quest that never satisfies? What is crooked cannot be straightened. What is lacking cannot be counted. There's something broken. There's something fundamentally sort of out of kilter in every pursuit you go down that you can't fix and make it deliver the goods for you as much as you try. You can't, it's like a bar of soap that keeps escaping you every time you kind of grab onto it. Now, it is almost a cliche that when you look at those who seem to have achieved everything you could possibly want, that they end up lost, end up dissatisfied. It is the tragic story of so many who sort of go through life and burn bright and bright and then burn out. You could pick any sort of celebrity who's gone through difficult times. They will often say that it never delivered what I wanted. I remember reading James Corden's autobiography. He said it was, when he achieved everything he wanted, it was like scoring a goal in football. And you feel at a moment of elation, you walk and pick the ball up, and it's as if everyone's sort of turned around and ignored you. Like, I was there, I achieved it all, but, well, I just pick the ball up and go back and start the game again. Jim Carrey on the Graham Norton show some years ago tells the story about being at the start of his career, and he was doing kind of comedy gigs, working the sort of the kind of rounds of comedy gigs. He drove home from one night. It had gone fairly well. He was still sort of finding his feet, finding his groove, his style, and so on. But he sat on his drive in his car, and he says that he visualized his future life. And then he decided to do something. He wrote himself a check. When you had checks back in those days. He wrote himself a check for $10 million. And he dated it to a few years in the future from where he was then. And then he kind of went on with his career. 6 months before that date that he had written on his check, he landed a role in a film that earned him $10 million, sorry. I remember when I watched the Graham Norton show where he told that story, understandably, I suppose, the crowd burst into applause. Like, oh, wow, that's fantastic. You worked hard, you visualized your future, you manifested it. Everyone was joyful. Because at some level, everyone's like, yeah, if I could do that, I would. I'd write myself a check and would get them. That would help. You might know, famously, well, I think it was famous, I've heard this a few times, Jim Carrey said some years later, I think everybody should get rich and famous, do everything they ever dreamed of, so they can see that it's not the answer. Why did they all applaud him? Because at some level, we don't really believe that's true. At some level, we don't really believe that if we went through the research program of this guy in Ecclesiastes, that we could handle it, we could be joyful, even just a little bit more money. I don't need $10 million. But if you gave me $1 million, that would kind of sort me out for life. That's at least one way this goes. But I don't think this preacher here, this teacher, is mainly just talking about the sort of burning out people, like Jim Carrey or Matthew Perry or Philip Seymour Hoffman, whatever it is. Because as he goes on, as he reflects on this kind of quest to find solidity, solid joys, actually, the kind of conclusions that he comes to are sort of similar across them all. You can sort of fixate on the kind of party animal who burns out and realizes that it was all empty. The addict who just needs another shot to deliver because it keeps on failing. But more so in these verses, this teacher points us to how something that's true for all people, which is how brief and momentary all our lives are. Whether we achieve something in terms of, a career, or build a great family, or do great good in the world, or live a great life of partying. Whatever we want to sort of build and establish, Maybe particularly if we want to build something that might outlast us, that will leave a good mark in the world. What the teacher does here is he zooms out and he says, look, you're not in control of that sort of life project in that way. And in part, that's simply because we are all mortal and finite. As particularly as he considers his kind of quest as a kind of wise teacher, chapter 2, verse 12 onwards. I turn my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? Now, it's not that he's saying here that it doesn't matter if you're a wise guy living a good life or a foolish person. He goes on to say, verse 13, I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. It's better to be wise than to be a fool, but in the end, no one escapes the reality of our finiteness, of our mortality. And at least one thing that he is seeking to do here is to burst the bubble of thinking that we're in control of these things. That if I sit down and kind of plan out my life, I can build a life of meaning and joy and purpose and hope and hand that on to others. And he says, you just don't know how your life is going to go and how your legacy is going to be passed on. He wants to burst the bubble of humans being able to control how their life goes and how they gain from it. Kate Bowler is an academic in the States. She was diagnosed with serious stomach cancer a while back. And this is what she had to say about what that diagnosis of cancer did to her and her thinking about her life. I have a terrible premonition that at the end of this, once every stone is upturned and every drug tried, my family will have nothing left. I feel like an anvil dropped, crushing everything on its way down. I know it like I know the weight of my son's sleeping body in my arms. Control is a drug, and we are all hooked, whether or not we believe in the prosperity gospel's assurance that we can master the future with our words and attitudes. That's what her research is particularly into. I can barely admit to myself that I have almost no choice but to surrender, but neither can those around me. I can hear it in my sister-in-law's voice as she tells me to keep fighting. I can see it in my academic friends. When do the symptoms start, they ask. Is this hereditary? Buried in all their concern is the unspoken question, do I have any control? We want to think that, the span of our lives are basically under our control, and maybe you need something like that to show you that that simply isn't the case. The teacher's doing a thought experiment to think about that and think about how actually it's true for all of us. Or we want to leave a good legacy, but we can't control what happens after us. We want our children to grow up and to be well-rounded and mature people, but once we're gone, it's all out of our hands. Chapter 2 and verse 18 really drills into that. I hated all the things I had toiled for under the sun, because I must leave them to the one who comes after me. I don't think he's thinking many there of, you build a business and you hand it on to someone and they just waste it all. The point is you just don't know if they will or not. Now, we can think in the sort of small span of our lives, well, I can do some good and pass it on, and that's enough. But he wants you to zoom out and just ask if your confidence in that small thing is really, valid and justified. I mentioned last week about, really significant people in the past. A guy called Reverend Charles Butler in the 17th century, who none of us ever heard of. But even on the smaller scale of our own lives, I was reminded this week that in my own family, up my dad's side of the family, there's a story that people sort of vaguely tell about a great-great-grandfather who had loads and loads of money and then passed it on to his children to pass on to their children. And somewhere along the line, someone had a bad business deal and lost it all. And so, as it came down to our generation, there's a vague story in the past of, we were millionaires once or something. Here's the point of that. It's not that, that's going to happen every time, but you just don't know. And in your life right now, you might be very concerned to build something that passes on to others well, to contribute well to society in some way. Give it a few generations. You're a nobody. Your work will be sort of forgotten. It might have been good, it might have been bad. I don't mean to depress you, but what's the point of all this for this teacher? I think it is, first of all, just to stop and think. I don't think he's, first of all, wanting to get you to say, my life is meaningless, it has no meaning. Rather, he wants to get you to think, life is more complicated, life is briefer, life is more out of my control than I previously thought. It's smoke. We're not going to gain much, we can't guarantee it. The screenwriter, Michael Chabon, put it very well, I think. The world is so big, so complicated, so replete with marvels and surprises that it takes years for most people to begin to notice that it is also irretrievably broken. We call this period of research childhood. There follows a program of renewed inquiry, often involuntary, into the nature and effects of mortality, entropy, heartbreak, violence, failure, cowardice, duplicity, cruelty, and grief. The researcher learns their histories and their bitter lessons by heart. Along the way, he or she discovers that the world has been broken for as long as anyone can remember, and struggles to reconcile this fact with the ache of cosmic nostalgia that arises from time to time in the researcher's heart, an intimation of vanished glory, of lost wholeness, a memory of the world unbroken. We call the moment at which this ache first arises adolescence. The feeling haunts people all their lives. I think that is more or less what Ecclesiastes is inviting you to recognize. There's a brokenness to everything. There is an elusiveness, a briefness, but there's still so much good. So what are you going to do? Well, throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, we get moments where we begin to see what the answer might be, and we get one at the end of our reading. It might not feel like it. Chapter 2, verse 24, a person could do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. It might sound like he's saying, well, look, it's all so useless that why bother? Just have a party. But actually, I think he is giving us the sort of secret here, that we can see the world in all its beautiful brokenness, all its vaporous futility, and still receive it as a good gift from God. It's striking that the word God is basically missing from chapter 1, verse 14, all the way through to chapter 2, verse 23. And when we do see God, in chapter 1, verse 13, we hear what a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. But at the end, we see him talking about life as a gift from God. That's the key in Ecclesiastes. We're not in control of it. We can't keep hold of anything ultimately, but we can receive it and enjoy it from God. Someone described it as a bit like a snow day. If you remember snow days at school, when you woke up in the morning, you opened the curtains and the snow had fallen. You didn't control that, and you can't control it and keep it there. You can go and enjoy it for the time you have it, and then when the snow melts, well, that's it. Or think of it like a library. Life is like a library. You know, a library is full of wonderful books that you can enjoy, but you're going to have to return them all. They're not yours to hold on to forever. And if you spend your time in the library just sort of chasing down every book and piling them up, oh, maybe there's a better one over there, rather than enjoying the book that you have in front of you and taking it home and then taking it back again and giving it away, you won't get the most out of the library. It's that sort of idea that Ecclesiastes is reaching for in the end of chapter 2. He's got a lot more to say about it. And in one sense, he's trying to get you to the point of saying, yes, I do need something like that to make better sense of the world than just chasing after these kind of sources of meaning and purpose that don't ultimately deliver. And that is the invitation of this book. And it's an invitation that is true as much for him then as for us now. Because as Christian believers, if that's what we are, we still live in this world that Michael Chabon is describing, that's beautiful and broken. And we are looking forward to the day when God heals it forever. But in the meantime, because Jesus Christ has lived and died and rose again, we both know that he's going to make it all right again, and that we're still waiting for him to do that. And so in the meantime, we receive the good gifts of life like a snow day, or like a library, or maybe like, a beautiful park that you enjoy and savor, but you don't make your ultimate home there because it's a gift that you will give back. Let's consider if that is our approach to life, or if we want to go for some of these other ways of finding purpose that he explores here. Let's consider that for a few moments. I'm going to lead us in prayer. Lord God, we thank you that your word is full of rich challenge. Thank you that in this book of Ecclesiastes we find things that are strange, that disturb, that challenge us. Lord, please, in each of our own lives, in our hearts, would you show us what it means to live well in this world as creatures made by you? Please help us to be real, to confront the reality of our finitude. And please, Lord, show us what it means to receive good gifts from you, knowing we're going to give them back one day. In Jesus' name, amen. We're going to stand and sing our next hymn.